traumatized from witnessing the massacre of his entire family and village in Erzincan in 1915, that he was compelled to obey a vision of his dead mother, who commanded him to avenge her and his family's honor by murdering Talat. While this story swayed the opinion of the court in 1921, we now know that Talerian's entire defense, his entire life story between 1915 and 1921, was deliberately fabricated by the ARF's lawyers in order to reach an acquittal. Regardless of this, Talerian instantly became a national hero and a revered figure within the Armenian diaspora, and was their honored guest throughout the world in 1922. In the press and the literature, Talerian disappeared for the next 38 years. Between 22 and 1960, he doesn't show up in the mainstream. But at the time of his death, in May of 1960, he died in California. Under the name of Saro Malikian, his obituary appeared in both the New York Times and the London Times, and both articles reaffirmed his heroic status as the avenger of the Armenian people for the crimes of 1915. Shortly thereafter, a multi-part series in the life of Saghman Talerian appeared in the Armenian Review. It was followed by another in 1962. In 1965, to coincide with the 50th anniversary of 1915, the first book detailing and glorifying Talerian's role in the assassination of Talat and the indisputable righteousness of his cause was published. The book, at best, was an attempt at historical fiction, but it was written and packaged as if it were the autobiography of Saghman Talerian. It's filled with crusade-like language and innuendos, and it situates the Armenian question at the center of an epic struggle between good and evil. 4 years later, in 1969, a monument was erected in a Fresno, California cemetery to commemorate Talerian's life and the contributions and sacrifices he made to the Armenian nation. In the 40 years since Yanikian's assassination of Mr. Baider and Mr. Demir, it has become clear that the mythical status and the reverence allotted to Saghman Talerian within the Armenian community had a much more profound impact on Yanikian than simply the reemergence of the Armenian question. Poor, alone, and disgraced, Yanikian wanted to secure his place in Armenian legend while he still could. And he had not only read the book on Talerian, he had even written a letter to its author applauding its contents, and had met with the author on at least one occasion. These meetings show up in the FBI files. On January 27th, 1973, Yanikian, after at least 2 months of careful planning and preparation, invited Mehmet Baider and Bahadir Demir to lunch at the Santa Barbara Hotel. Mr. Kirla Kovali has already explained what happens next. So I'll pick it up where, after the murders, he sits down, called the police, and waited patiently for them to arrive. Yanikian had every intention of being caught, and like the trial in Berlin, he wanted to turn his legal proceedings into a means through which both to remind the world of the events in eastern Anatolia in 1915 and to indict the Turkish government. What unfolded was essentially an almost flawless theatrical reenactment of Talerian's 1921 trial, right down to the fabricated testimony. Yanikian pled not guilty to murder, arguing that he did not kill 2 men, but that he destroyed 2 evils. He never exhibited any remorse for the taking of their innocent lives. Like Talerian, Yanikian claimed he was tormented by memories of an early 20th century childhood in eastern Anatolia. Born in Erzurum in 1895, his family barely escaped the massacres of Abdülhamid II by fleeing to Kars. He watched his brother murdered by 2 Turks in 1903, lost over 20 family members during World War I and its aftermath, and witnessed firsthand thousands of victims of the deportations while he was a member of one of the Armenian volunteer units in the Russian army. In the days preceding the double murder, he claimed that he was visited by apparitions of his brother and had promised this ghost that he would avenge him. Like Tillerian, the defense strategy employed by his lawyers attempted to show that the horrific scenes that Yanikian had witnessed as a child had caused lasting trauma, which, when combined with the pain caused by Turkey's continued denial of the atrocities, had left him mentally impaired. This whole act, however, was carefully constructed so Yanikian could portray himself as yet another victim turned war hero turned Armenian avenger like Saddam and Tillerian. The final FBI report on Yanikian, a comprehensive and thorough report of over 600 pages, tells a much different story. It shows a deranged, broke, and humiliated individual desperately looking for attention, redemption, and a chance of glory at the end of his life. To make sure that both he and the incident received the attention he believed it deserved, Yanikian mailed a 120-page manifesto to numerous politicians, leaders, and news agencies, and mailed out over 400 letters to Armenians all around the world, calling on them to wage war on Turkey and all of its representatives. Almost every pertinent aspect of his life that came out in the Santa Barbara courtroom is either refuted or made questionable by the FBI reports. There is absolutely no evidence that Yanikian was ever concerned with the Armenian question before 1967. In fact, before reading this book on Tillerian. There's no proof that he was born in Erzurum. In fact, most of the documentation says he was born in Tabriz. That he ever visited Kars, or that he had even volunteered in an Armenian unit in the Russian army. Again, Tillerian had been in the Russian volunteer unit. So. But having studied the Tillerian case, Yanikian would have known that this didn't necessarily matter. He would have known that his story, his justification for the murders, would be unquestionably accepted by the diaspora. A point proved by the funds donated to Yanikian's legal defense by Armenians from around the world as soon as he was arrested. Unlike the Armenian diaspora, however, the jury in California was either not convinced of Yanikian's story or felt that the events at the turn of the century had no bearing on a murder case in 1973, and they found him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. So in conclusion, therefore, Gurgen Yanikian was much more than simply the first assassin of many during the 1970s and 1980s, or the inspiration for modern Armenian terrorism. He was a vital link between the ARF's assassins of the early 20th century and the generation of Armenian terrorists that emerged in 1975. Yanikian proved that 60 years removed from the events of 1915, the diaspora would now support, both morally and financially, the assassination of any Turk. And that carrying out these death sentences made one an instant hero, whether or not the victim was a diplomat, a spouse, or even a child. And this was the end result of the cult of violence that had been nourished and encouraged within the Armenian communities around the world. And finally, less than a week after the murders, an article in the New York Times stated that it would be an act of insanity for Yanikian to hold Mr. Bader and Mr. Kinnear responsible for any alleged crimes that occurred in 1915. But tragically, what the author of that article did not know was that it was not just Yanikian, but thousands of other Armenians who held Mr. Bader and Mr. Kinnear responsible, and that many would soon follow Yanikian in his act of insanity.